the startup ecosystem has been a success story of India. The vibrant ecosystem supports millions of jobs and plays a big role in India's growth story. So what do startups expect from the upcoming budget? Well, we find that out in this next report. Take a look.
India's startup ecosystem has come a long way in the last decade. From just 350 in 2014, India now has over 90,000 startups. India now hosts the third largest startup ecosystem, worth over $350 billion. India is fast gaining reputation as a startup nation, with over 180,000 startups expected by 2030. But the journey faced hiccups in 2023. Only 2 startups achieved a $1 billion valuation. Overall funding too dried up, with a 73% drop in late-stage funding. At least 8 startups faced a markdown in their valuations as unsustainable business models and regulatory crackdowns dampened the ecosystem. Given the gloomy 2023, startups have several expectations from the upcoming budget. Improving ease of doing business tops the list. Startups say ending needless compliance requirements will boost the ecosystem. Startups in smaller cities and towns expect more support from the budget. They argue that easier credit access and better infrastructure can help them expand. With the ecosystem always seeking funding, many want a fund dedicated for startups. Such a fund is expected to help startups in several emerging industries. Many startups seek mentoring as well as close collaboration with the academia. More support for incubation centers and skills training is on top of their wish list. The stage is set for February 1st. Will the final budget of Modi Government 2.0 invigorate India's startups? Will the budget help shape the future pathway for the ecosystem? Will the budget be the harbinger of change in the ecosystem? We'll get the answers to these questions on that day. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
All right. Now to discuss India's ecosystem regarding its startups, and especially because the budget is right around the corner, what will that mean for India's startup ecosystem, which is funding so many jobs and is offering so many jobs, and of course is bringing up so many more portfolios as well. To discuss matters further, we're being joined by Samyak Chakrabarti. We tried connecting with him earlier. We now have better connectivity, so we will try to have that conversation with him. He's the founder and chief architect of Workverse, an EdTech startup. He's live from Mumbai. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Thank you for having me back.
All right, Mr. Chakrabarti, now that we can hear you loud and clear, let's start up with this. What does the startup sector really expect from the budget?
I think a more enabling ecosystem. So while there is access to funding that has been made available, thanks to this present-day government's ease of doing business policies from an investor standpoint, but still to run a startup today, whether you're a 1 crore business or a 100 crore business, you still have the same amount of compliance. You still have the same amount of paperwork to do, which can be quite taxing and expensive for emerging startups. So more enabling ecosystem from that standpoint. Second, also to sensitize the income tax authorities and the ROC on new forms of business models, because a lot of our policy and our auditing is still based on business models that are more profit and loss driven, book order driven versus valuation and predictive revenue driven. And I think that mindset change is very important. Otherwise, that conflict between startup founders and the compliance ecosystem can be quite taxing. I think that should be a major change. And secondly, also more availability of funding and mentoring to startups and founders in Bharat. And when I say Bharat, I mean the emerging cities. Being in Bombay, I've been well exposed to many possibilities, but being in a small city like probably Vijayawada, that young boy or girl needs to have far greater exposure than I did.
Mr. Chakrabarti, now, of course, we know how the startup sector in India has flourished. I also wanted to get your thoughts on this, on how budgets in earlier years, in the last few years at least, have helped the startup ecosystem reach where it has.
I think, for example, for one of the biggest transformatory initiatives was the Startup India initiative, where they give tax exemption, a tax holiday to startups. I think that was one step towards understanding the realities of how startups are built. And secondly, more access to availability of funds. And also the whole MSME infrastructure, which gave startups a preference in being able to receive payments, being able to getting some holidays with their GST. That was, I think, very transformatory in the last few budgets.
And Samyak, one last thing that we'd like to get your thoughts on. What role can the state play in helping India's startup ecosystem grow even further from here?
I think what the state can do is build better infrastructure, physical infrastructure, because WeWork or these kind of things are available in a Bombay or Delhi, but again, smaller cities where Bharat is really emerging, far greater physical infrastructure, far greater research and development infrastructure that can be shared would be very beneficial, especially with startups blooming in healthcare and the medical sector now.
All right, Mr. Chakrabarti, thank you so much for joining in, and we're glad we reconnected with you and get all your thoughts on
Yes.
the startup sector. And of course, we're leading into the budget. We will be in touch with you for further updates as and when it comes in.
Thank you.